Welcome to the Great Beer State podcast from the Michigan Brewers Guild. The Great Beer State is a weekly show sharing conversations and stories from the passionate people who contribute to our vibrant Michigan beer community. It is made up of a mix between full-length archived interviews from the Guild's first documentary book project, A Rising Tide, Stories from the Michigan Brewers Guild, and conversations recorded in the here and now. Each episode is kicked off with a conversational update from host Scott Graham, Executive Director of the Guild, and the beer-evangelist Fred Biltman, author of A Rising Tide. Here's Scott and Fred. Welcome to Michigan's Great Beer State. My name's Fred. I'm here with my good friend Scott, Executive Director for the Michigan Brewers Guild. Scott, welcome to episode 23 of the Great Beer State podcast.
Thanks, Fred. Hello, and welcome to yourself.
So today we're going to bring another interview out from the archives. We talked to Ron Jeffries, Jolly Pumpkin Artisan Ales. We talked to them at their Dexter Brew Pub location, tasting room location, and I look forward to that introduction and sharing that conversation from a very colorful and important member of the Michigan Brewers Guild. But before that, we like to talk about what's going on right now, what's up for brewery members, allied members, enthusiasts, and of course the beer-loving public. What's new?
Well, we're still living a life of COVID. We see a little uptick going on in Michigan, and I think around the country as well, at least in the number of positive cases. We see the federal government wrangling over spending a whole lot of money on more support, either a whole lot or a whole lot less a little or a whole lot and a little more, I think is kind of where they're stuck. I'm not sure anything is going to come of that before the upcoming election. But maybe even as we speak, it's being worked on. I really don't know, but it does make me think of other organizations that have been really active in taking a leadership role to try and do things to help the industry members survive and get through these crazy COVID times. And of course, in Michigan, we have the Michigan Restaurant and Lodging Association, which is a really effective and prominent group. They've got lots of great resources, and I think provide really terrific member resources. A lot of our Brewers Guild brewery members are also members of the Restaurant Association, and they're out working on behalf of all hospitality operations. And you and I have just recently had some conversations about the National Independent Restaurant Coalition that has a Save Our Restaurants effort, and I think that they're really doing some good work too.
Yeah, and the Restaurant Act is a recent piece of proposed legislation that has passed the Congress and is now trying to get through the Senate. And the Independent Restaurant Coalition is doing a lot of work to continue to add sponsors to that, and and just keep the pressure on to keep this industry supported on the federal level. Of course, it's such a chaotic time with lots of different things being leveraged against each other, sometimes for reasons that don't have to do with the the cause itself. So who knows what'll happen, but you can check both those organizations out. SaveRestaurants.com is the Independent Restaurant Coalition, and Michigan Restaurant and Lodging Association is at www.mrla.org. And so each of those organizations have connected with the Michigan Brewers Guild as of late, and I think it's important to say that we're making sure that the tasting rooms of breweries are recognized for the hospitality units that they are, and keep them supported like every other restaurant.
Yeah, and we're lucky to have prominent, good, effective organizations that we can kind of support and follow their lead on some things like this. I'm not sure people always think of restaurant and hospitality business as an industry, but it's a huge industry and employs a lot of people. And like we've said before, I don't want to be doom and gloom, but 2021 is going to continue to be a challenging year for people who are operating with restricted capacities, outdoor seating opportunities going away in Michigan anyway. So we're really hopeful that we see things improve throughout the year next year, and that we see our members survive and turn the corner and thrive. So it's great to have other organizations that we can support and that are out trying to support the industry.
Absolutely. And even if there was a magic wand and everything was better tomorrow, you have the entire hospitality industry digging out of an unprecedented, challenging year that they just experienced. So digging out is a second challenge to overcome, even when things get better. So good to keep everybody in your thoughts. And members, brewery members with tasting rooms, don't forget to check out those associations for helpful supportive pieces and information as well. So on to the Brewers Dozen. Last week we shifted into a regional edition of our second lap around giving shout outs to our brewery members. This week you've put together a nice list of breweries from the general Ann Arbor area in homage to our guest interview today with Ron Jeffries. You want to kick us off?
Yeah, so starting right downtown Ann Arbor, a longtime part of the community and member of the Michigan Brewers Guild, Grizzly Peak Brewing Company.
Yeah, on the alma mater of Ron. And they opened just a couple weeks, I think, or a month. I think it's in the interview after Arbor Brewing Company.
Yeah. And Blue Tractor Barbecue and Brewery is also downtown Ann Arbor, and it's semi-related anyway to that whole Jolly Pumpkin group.
Yeah, next up is Jolly Pumpkin in Ann Arbor. So multiple locations now, and including the nice spot there in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, and then if you head a little bit west of the downtown area, there are 3 breweries out there, including Holmes Brewery.
And then you've got Townie's Brewery.
And Wolverine State Brewing Company. So that's when you head out west.
And then a little bit south of downtown, you've got Beer Camp.
Beer Camp and also Mothfire Brewing Company, which is a reincarnation of Pileated Brewing Company.
And then a little further south, rounding out your tour, you've got Edelbrau Brewing Company.
Yep. And then to fill out the breweries we're mentioning today, if you go east of Ann Arbor to Ypsilanti, of course, the home of the Michigan Brewers Guild Summer Beer Festival, you've got the Arbor Brewing Company Corner Brewery right there in the Depot Town area.
And then Ipsy Ale House, the home of brewer Ted Badgerow, who we spoke to a few episodes back, one of the very, very early entries with his real ale company in Chelsea. He's back in business at the Ipsy Ale House.
Yeah, and then also right in that Ipsy area is Unity Vibration Kombucha, makers of kombucha and kombucha beers.
Yeah, so that rounds up our Brewers Dozen for this episode. You can certainly find a lot of great beer from all over the state when you're in Ann Arbor, but you can go right to the source and visit a number of those excellent Brewers Guild member breweries. So that brings us to introducing Ron. You and I both go way back with Ron. And he and his wife Lori are important community members for the Michigan brewing scene, the Michigan Brewers Guild. He's a recipient of the Tom Burns Award, which recognizes the pioneering spirit of the Michigan brewing community. And it's fun to listen back to the interview. Of course, it was equally fun to sit down with Ron. And he's just got a one-of-a-kind sort of spirit, and love to hear his take on things. What do you think?
Yeah, I love Ron, and this was really a great interview. I mean, Ron is so level-headed and matter-of-fact and thoughtful and insightful, and it was really fun to hear hear this interview. I think it's the first time I've noticed, and might be the only time, that we hear of somebody who might have been inspired to become a brewer due to an aneurysm or something.
Yeah. And also, he's inspired by home brewing, but not a home brewer.
Right.
So he sort of witnessed it and said, I think I will head to the lab and find out more about this interesting phenomena.
Yeah, and look at what we got. Really, Ron has been a pioneer in the styles of beers that are made by Jolly Pumpkin, with having these, these wild beers aged in oak barrels. Everything that Jolly Pumpkin makes is aged in oak. I think it still is. But when Ron started doing that, that was pretty far out there, and he really, even though his brewery even when it was quite small, it's still not what you'd call a really big brewery. He was developing the nationwide and worldwide recognition for what he was doing, because it was so unique.
Absolutely. And, I feel like that's one of the themes that we always hear about and talk about, is that microbrewing, craft brewing, it's always been sort of, off the beaten path sort of thing for the consumer public. I mean, now it looks different. We're still a minority percentage-wise of the marketplace, but it looks different now, 20, 30 years later. We are always a little bit of a shock and curiosity to regular people. I feel like when Ron stepped down from Grizzly Peak, I'm pretty sure he was on the board at the time, because we were meeting or we were at the festival or something when he announced that he was stepping down and he was going to go open Jolly Pumpkin. And I just remember him describing the concept to a group of insiders, to a group of people in the inner circles of the Brewers Guild. And we had the same quizzical, curious look that the public normally had about us. It was like, are you sure? That is something that moment just stuck with me, because he saw it. He did not flinch. He was not unsure. And he had a concept that was out purely imaginative and beyond what other people were seeing or thinking about. And it's fascinating to see him head to it, get it done, and make a mark, and really shift the brewing community from his work.
Yeah, he really had an impact that continues to ripple today. There's still people that if they're not inspired by what he's doing, they're inspired by somebody that was inspired by what Ron's doing, I think. And of course, Ron, was on the board of directors, and then he opened Jolly Pumpkin, and a while after that, he got elected again. So he was, at two different times contributing to the board, and definitely was part of the development of what the Michigan Brewers Guild became. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and again, he highlights one of the reasons we did this project is that I think he's a big advocate for education through participation, and like getting in and figuring it out and learning this and recognizing that this is a hard business. And so get in and start learning. And I think he speaks to that really well. I really hope younger breweries and brewery people and brewers give this a listen, because I think he's a gifted mentor in a lot of ways, and that he's talking about the aspect of learning versus trying to teach you every single thing. And I think that's what it's all about. And I think that's one of the reasons we wanted these stories to be out there. So grateful to Ron for sharing that with us.
Yeah, it's a real treat that this is in the archives.
So with that, we'll take you to Dexter, Michigan, where we sat down in a bustling Jolly Pumpkin tasting room with Ron Jeffries, founder of Jolly Pumpkin Artisan Ales. Here's Ron. Nice to see you, Ron.
Good to see you, Fred.
Cheers. We've been sharing stories and just kind of talking about the old days and about this community that came to be in Michigan. And I'd love to start just here. How did you start brewing, and what did those first days look like for you?
Well, it's a long story, and it's not a very exciting story.
Yeah.
I got into brewing probably backwards than most people. I got in through studying the science. I was kind of in a transition between graduate and undergraduate school. Wasn't really sure what I was doing. Was sleeping on a friend's couch. Lori and our young son Damon were in Florida, and I was trying to get a job. Kind of a stressful time. And one evening I came home and my friend was homebrewing for the first time ever. And I've always liked beer all through college, really enjoyed beer. And one of the bands that I was in, one of the drummers was really into, at the time, was craft beer, in the 80s, what you could get for craft beer. And so kind of was into the beginning of the craft beer scene and came home to find my friend homebrewing, and I was asking him all sorts of questions, and of course he didn't know any of the answers. He's just like, this is my first time, and of course he's got Charlie's book, and he's like adding hops and reading, and I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And something in my brain, it was like a aneurysm or something, just was like, this is really interesting. I really want to get into this. So I started studying brewing science. I applied to graduate school, tailored my program to have to do with breweries and microbreweries, issues of waste and efficiency, and all that kind of fun science stuff. So didn't start as a crazy home brewer in the garage or anything like that, although there's a home brewing aspect to the story. And so about 2/3 of the way through my degree, I started applying to work at breweries and eventually got hired to work in a brewery, and been brewing ever since.
What year was that?
84 or 85.
Wow. What brewery was that?
Interestingly enough, Grizzly Peak.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm not sure if it was 84 or 85. Opened right after Arbor, who I think he just...
So 95.
95.
Yeah.
95, sorry. Yeah, sorry, 95. Right after the Gruffs opened, we opened a month or two later.
And were you the opening brewer?
I was one of two opening brewers.
Okay. And so that's your first brewery job,
Yeah.
right? But you had a head for the science and you'd been exposed to home brewing. What was the other brewers' experience like, and how were you guys figuring out how to create this new thing that there were hardly any of?
He had taken the American Brewers Guild course, the early days of that. I don't know if Steve Parks was doing it at that time or not, but so he had that course, and kind of came from a little bit different background. The system that John had bought for Grizzly Peak was a Peter Austin, Alan Pugsley style system, so we went out to Maine to learn how to brew on it, and it was, of course, a little different than what Greg had trained on at the American Brewers Guild. So it was kind of just figuring out, how do we use open fermenters, how do we use Grundies instead of regular bright tanks, and things along those lines.
Yeah. So, and the terrain, the landscape looked a lot different at that time in 94, 95.
Sure.
There were a handful of breweries open around the state, and only half of them had were of this model of kind of the small microbrewery status. I just gotta imagine that was a wild time to be considering what could be next, because you didn't have a lot of examples. So how did that feed your imagination, and what were you hoping for? What did you imagine in your next steps?
Well, when I started studying brewing science and brewing professionally, my whole goal was to one day own my own brewery. So every brewery that I worked at, I treated it like it was my own, meaning I did the absolute best I could do, and learned as much as I could along the way. In the early 90s when we started, everything looked all rosy, but then if you remember by 96, 97, you had a bunch of people getting into the industry who thought this was going to be some sort of golden cash cow. For whatever reason, I have no idea, but they thought it was. They saw 17% growth or whatever. And we had a few years of almost 0% growth, and a lot of bad and or fake brands like Rhino. Do you remember like Rhino, Rhino Chasers or whatever?
Oh, yeah.
those sort of brands dropping out of the market.
Three Stooges, Bad Frog.
Right, exactly. So there was it's a tumultuous time because we were expecting great things, and then all of a sudden things sort of seemed to stagnate. And then we really, as brewers, all of us that were in the industry at the time, really had to start proving ourselves. We really had to start making good beer. We had to start making consistent good beer, and good beer consistently. And I'll say those words again and again and again in different orders, but we had to figure it out. We had to get the consumer engaged in our beers, enjoying our beers and coming back for our beers, not thinking we were one-offs or a joke or we were going out of business. I mean, you remember in I don't remember if it was 96 or 7, but there were so many articles about like craft beer is dead and all that sort of stuff, and we really had to struggle and fight to prove to people it's not dead.
Right.
It's delicious and it's here to stay.
And I imagine, knowing what you were just saying, that you had the intention to open your own place from the beginning. So I imagine you had kind of one eye on different things. So like one eye, you're a brewer for an organization, and so in some sense, unless you were interested in it, you wouldn't have to worry about all that stuff. I'm here to make the beer. I got to figure out how much to make and what to make.
Yeah, exactly.
But a shift brewer could insulate themselves from the worries of business trends. But for somebody that's got an entrepreneurial spirit and is planning your next moves, that had to be your other focus of like, what's this climate like that I'm thinking about opening a business in? Was that there from the get-go? And
Absolutely. I mean, and as well as, a young family and trying to buy a home and, all the things that happen to young adults as they start their careers. And so all those things were constantly on my mind, the business side of things as well, and trying to understand and learn the business side. Working with a great organization like Mission Management was a really great opportunity to learn the restaurant side of operations and cost controls and everything that they do so well. And as you said, you could just be a brewer in a situation like that, and I'm just brewing the beer, tanks are full, I'm going home, I have a great life. But for somebody with the aspirations that I had, which was to create not just beer, but to take this beer and elevate it into unique works of art, things that had never been created before, beer styles that had never been done before, I really needed to, if not master, at least understand all aspects and facets of the industry. So Grizzly Peak is a brew pub, was a brew pub, is a brew pub. I had to also study everything outside of that microcosm. After Grizzly Peak, I worked in a microbrewery, but understand the whole supply chain, how the distributor network works, how the three-tier system works, how the MLCC works, how all this legislation works that binds our industry together or separates it, and really gave me a solid foundation. I was actually quite lucky. I worked for them for 9 years, almost a decade, at a couple of very busy brew pubs that they opened, and it allowed me to open breweries. So I was installing breweries, I was designing recipes, working with different yeasts, different malts, but at the same time learning the bigger business side of brewing and the brewing universe nationally, what was going on, getting involved with the Brewers Association. They weren't called the Brewers Association back then, but getting involved with that group and sort of trying to set myself up to own my own place.
And in that time, while you were still at Grizzly Peak, you, both during the time the Brewers Guild came to be, and so you were watching, you had to, you're kind of watching Michigan grow up, and that we went from a handful of breweries to 30 to 60, et cetera. Do you remember, what's your earliest guild memory of a group of brewers starting to get together into what would become the Brewers Guild?
I was at that first meeting that Rex organized. I forget where it was. Saginaw?
Yeah.
Was it in Saginaw?
Yeah.
The
Street Pub.
That first meeting, and I don't remember exactly the contents of the meeting other than we agreed we wanted to form a guild that would help educate the Michigan consumer on craft beer. And eventually when the guild got around to having officers in elections, I was elected to be on the first board of directors of that guild, where I continued to serve, I don't know, for a while, until I decided that we needed new people. You know, you get to a point in an organization where it's like the same people can't always be at the top. You need new perspectives and invigorated things. And also, Lori and I opened Jolly Pumpkin, and I got super busy. So after a session or two on the board of owning my own brewery, I was like, you know what? I feel I'm doing a disservice to the board. Get somebody young on here who can spend the time and invest the time that I can't at this time with my business.
Yeah. So do you remember, what can you share about those early years on the board? What were the issues of the day, and what sort of path was getting carved by us coming together and working together that might not have been otherwise?
Well, that was a long time ago. And you were at most of that stuff too, Fred.
Yeah.
So, and you're more eloquent than I am, so I'm sure your piece on this will be better. But there was just a lot of deciding that we would be a cohesive group. There are a lot of state guilds that are not cohesive, that have a lot of infighting, that can't agree. So a lot of the early days was about what can we agree on? What can we accomplish together? What are some topics maybe we should stay away from for the time being? Initially, politics was one of the things that we all agreed that's too divisive. We need a cohesive group that can speak with one voice. And so I think most of those early conversations were just about how can we be a group? How can we speak with one voice for all these diverse business models? And at the time, there's so many more diverse business models now, but at the time when you said there are 30 breweries or whatever, it seemed like everybody had a different business model.
Yeah.
And as a how can
and they were all about 3 or 4 years old, with like 1 or 2 exceptions.
Exactly. So how can we find a common ground that we all agree that we can focus on to promote Michigan beer?
Yeah, I like the way you said that, because it wasn't like we hammered the issues that we weren't in sync on. We didn't hammer them into sync.
No.
We kept looking, right? And we found the one we were already in sync on. And then worked on that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a different approach than just pound the peg harder. And eventually it'll be a, square or whatever.
And I think you see that in a lot of brewers guilds around the country, even today. The Colorado Brewers Guild broke up last year, the year before. I don't know if they've gotten back together. Another guild that I'm familiar with, the Hawaii Brewers Guild, they just get together and argue about stuff. And that's not really constructive, because our group, craft beer in general, is just so small and has so many outside forces that are so strong and powerful and well-funded that for us to fight amongst ourselves, even though we have difference of opinion, is just... it's counterproductive. It tears us apart. It makes us even weaker than we already are when we're compared to a lot of these bigger, well-funded organizations and brewers.
Yeah. And so when you think about sort of the Ron Jeffries school of hard knocks, where you recently branded, but when you were saying, listen, I had aspirations to open my own business, so I was going to learn as much as I could in this close to a decade you spent working for a larger organization. Would you say that your time served on the board, engaging in that community building effort, did that influence you as a business person, as an entrepreneur? Was that did it end up contributing to your education and preparation to be your own business?
100%, absolutely. I think that I've always had a natural empathy, not as much as Lori, my wife. She's very empathetic, but I've always been able to see other people's opinions and sides, and so working with the board and with the guild is really an opportunity to say, hey, this person has a valid business, they have valid ideas, these aren't my ideas, but they're not any less valid than mine. And so I think that working with the guild was really very helpful and very instrumental in building our philosophy that we now have at Jolly Pumpkin, which is a very inclusive philosophy of, goofy, all brewers, all faiths, all whatever. We're a very inclusive brewery, and I think that my time on the guild is really, the board really helped develop seeing other aspects of the business. I mean, when you're running your own business, you see your own business and you see the things that affect your own business, but they may be different than things that affect other people's businesses. And so it's great to have a forum where you can learn about other people's things. Unfortunately, at some of the last annual meetings, you don't always see that with some of the younger, newer members. They don't realize the wealth of knowledge, and they don't realize how much people who have been in the industry for a long time are really willing to share and really willing to help. And I'm not out to get you. I want you to succeed. I mean, I sure want to succeed too. I want to stay in business too. Yeah. But if you succeed, that's one more craft brewer. That's one more whatever small percentage of the beer drinkers that are drinking craft beer. So I think it was very instrumental in forming a lot of the philosophies that Lori and I still carry till today in our business practice.
Yeah. How have the challenges changed for the small independent brewery operation from those early, mid 90s to now? What do you think is different for somebody getting started?
I think it's a very different landscape, as many people will agree. We've gone from a few hundred breweries when we started, a few hundred. You pretty much knew everybody. Young guys today that work for me or that I meet are like so surprised. I know, yeah, I know Sam. Yeah, Greg. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Exactly. We grew up together. I mean, not exactly, but kind of. But it's a different landscape in that now there are 7,000 breweries. And so some of the challenges are the same and different. The challenge was getting distributor attention, and not because of the challenges of today, but because they didn't care. Right. They had big brands.
They didn't necessarily believe we had an audience.
Exactly, and especially after the late 90s thing, they're like, you guys are all washed up, you're just flash in the pan, you're going to be out of business soon. Why should we bother? These big brands can give us all sorts of support that you can't. So the challenges were really getting the distributors to pay attention to us. And the challenges are relatively the same now with distributors and retailers. Retailers are overwhelmed with brands. There are so many small, hyper-local brands that it's really tough to get a retailer's attention. I mean, we get letters from buyers at stores that are, I would consider downright rude. They're like, I don't want anything that, I don't want to go into the details of these letters, but it was just shockingly not polite. And then the distributors are overwhelmed with brands, and they're only looking for brands that are performing and or, again, can offer support. And so a lot of the smaller breweries are, of course, turning to tap rooms. And so now you have this whole taproom movement where a lot of breweries are selling a lot of their beer through tap rooms, which is super profitable for them, and or opening, where legal, multiple tap rooms. And so now again, you have this distributor conflict where the distributor is feeling they're losing a little piece of their pie when the brewery gets to sell direct to consumer, whether it's at their on-site tap room or in states where it's legal, an off-site tap room. And so again, you're seeing the struggles are with the same people, but for different reasons.
Yeah.
It seemed like in between there was like a happy time when,
for a couple of months.
When everything we came out with.
I love you, and I saw you, and you have the perfect amount of attention.
Exactly.
And you're selling just the right amount of beer in your tap room.
More beer? And like, okay, we'll buy more tanks. And now it's like, we don't want more beer.
But finding, it seems like the the commonality there is striking a balance between, relevance and consumer energy, brand equity.
Right.
What makes that balance up is what changes all the time.
Exactly.
But the need to have that balance is a theme that you have to adapt your methods to the current context, not to what you want it to be.
Exactly, and it's ironic that you say that, because I always tell everybody, every time somebody in my organization gets upset about, well, this is different, or it wasn't like this, or this is new, I'm like, well, beer's a liquid, okay? Beer's a liquid. It's fluid. It moves.
Yeah.
Things are constantly in motion, and you just have to understand and be prepared for that. And is it challenging? Is it a really challenging business environment right now? Absolutely. We have everything from tariffs on aluminum and that are affecting our cans, and all sorts of things that are going on that make it a challenging business. It's one of the most highly regulated industries in the country to begin with, highly taxed, and it's not tough to be a brewer.
Yeah.
It's cool, it's stylish, everybody thinks it's a great job. But at the end of the day, I'm sweaty, my guys are sweaty, we're tired, we're just going to enjoy a beer.
Yeah. And I don't think we could point to a year that didn't, or an era, a year, a month that didn't have challenges, that didn't have,
Absolutely.
especially in American alcohol,
Oh yeah.
that didn't have some unfair components, right?
Life's not fair.
I mean, there have been people who don't agree with alcohol. There have been forces against us since before Prohibition. They're the ones that brought Prohibition, for instance. And like for that to happen, I mean, I do think there's a sense of maturity when you're like, this is fun, it's stylish, it's meaningful to me. I think it's meaningful to our communities. None of those said easy. And none of those said without challenge or adversity or even discord amongst our, compatriots, our colleagues. We're not always going to agree with everybody.
No, you don't. And that is, as to get back to what you were saying about the Brewers Guild, especially in the early days, is that's really what it was about, was finding commonalities. Is yes, we don't agree on everything. We have, in some cases, radically different business models. But what can we agree on? What can we put forward to the consumer as why what we do is great, and why they should pay attention to us and enjoy what we do? Part of that is making great beer. I mean, it's hard to not enjoy great beer. The second part of that is getting that in front of the consumer, and that is where we've always run into challenges, from the days of the disbelief of the distributors to now the overabundance of beer and the almost antagonistic approach to the taproom concept and the growth of the taproom concept.
Yeah.
Now all my distributors hate me.
They hated you before, they just found a talking point.
Exactly. Probably true enough. True enough.
Here's to the challenge. So, if we share the idea that we're stronger together, and there's reasons to engage, there's reason to be an active supporter of the community, which may be via the Brewers Guild. What do you think is the invitation or the call to action for a younger brewery? What would your words of encouragement be to get involved and get engaged? What's in it for them?
I think education is important, and a sense of history. I mean, a little bit ago I got my decades confused with the 80s and the 90s, is because I started studying brewing science, not only science, but the industry, and going back and reading industry journals in graduate school in the 80s and learning about the industry and what was going on in the industry and the challenges then, and then getting into it in the 90s and being able to see those similarities. So I think that's the most challenging thing that I've seen with a lot of the younger brewers getting into it is a lack of sense of history. And maybe I'm only saying that because I'm old and I'm getting older and I have more history. But even when I started, when I got into it, it was important for me to understand the industry and to see what had happened, when was, not that it even really matters, but when was the first Great American Beer Festival?
Yeah.
How many breweries were there? What has happened since then?
And at that time, you had to look farther. You had to search harder. You had to leave the state. You had to
Exactly.
You had to find mentors and examples much farther afield.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, the history is closer to people now because there's somebody in their state that's done it.
They just have to call you, Fred, or me. Send us an email.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always surprising when I get a lot of emails from people, startup breweries from all around the country, people interested in what we do and they kind of want to do that same model. And they're always so surprised at how open I am and how honest and willing I am to engage. And certainly my time is somewhat limited because my company gets more complicated and I have to spend time doing like really boring stuff now, but I'm always willing to engage and talk about beer and the formation of a company culture and just the pure, like, it's all fun and games, but it's like really science. It's like science behind here.
Yeah.
There's like real science that helps us make the same or at least very similar beer every day. Even when we do what we do here, which is all the oak aging with the wild cultures, there's just a lot of science. And so to reach out and help people, and people are always so surprised, always so grateful. And I think that's what I would encourage younger brewers to do, is to find somebody that well, they like their beers, they like their business practice, they like their whatever goes along with business practice, company culture, and reach out and say, hey, I want to do what you do. And I think that a lot of them would be surprised at how many people are happy to talk about what they do and spread that sort of culture.
Well, thank you for everything you've put into our culture of Michigan beer, and just appreciate you taking time to sit with me and really everything you've contributed. I'm really proud of what we have here, and it wouldn't be the same without you. So
Thank you, Fred.
Appreciate that.
I'm really honored that you chose to come and talk to me. I mean, I have been here since not the absolute beginning, but the beginning of a lot of all this. And sometimes when you've been around for a while and you hear this from other older brewers and breweries around the country, is people tend to forget about you, and it's always about the new thing and the new guy and the new brewery. So that you wanted to come and speak with me really meant a lot to me. So thank you very much.
It's mutual. And you've carved a brave path that's honest and personality driven, and I think I hope is an inspiration to a lot of other people. It's like you've really demonstrated what going for it can bring.
We did something that was crazy. 100% oak aged sour beer. When people had one or two, maybe a few across the country, but we went all in.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd recommend it.
Here we are. Any good idea? Most of the important things in the world had to blow a stop sign at some point. A bunch of people told them they shouldn't do it. It's a litmus test.
I got a number of those letters. Alan Sprints from Hair of the Dog wrote me a letter.
Oh, yeah?
And he was just like, don't
Thanks
quit your
for
day
listening
job.
and sharing while supporting Michigan breweries and craft
did.
beer everywhere. The Michigan Brewers Guild was formed in 1997 with its first summer beer festival taking place in July of 1998. Its now 5 annual festivals are dedicated exclusively to Michigan beer brewed by more than 270 member breweries. The Michigan Brewers Guild exists to promote and protect the passionate Michigan beer industry in every way possible. To learn more, visit us at mibeer.com or say hello on one of our social media pages, as we love hearing from you. From coast to coast, from far and near, let's drink Michigan beer.
Let's drink Michigan beer.